Thank you so much for joining us today. Good evening once again. My name is Arunima Chervatur. I am a third year political science student at Lady Shri Ram College for Women, Delhi University. And I have been a part of Policy Matrix for around 8 months. And I'm so excited to welcome all of you here to discuss a topic that I think is extremely relevant today. The topic we have chosen today for this panel discussion is dissent, defamation, and democracy. And with us, we have an esteemed collection of panelists. We have with us Dr. Amar Patnaik. He is a honorable member of parliament at the Rajya Sabha. We have with us Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, who is a journalist, writer, and filmmaker. We have with us Charu Pragya, who is a media panelist for the BJP. And she's also the first female head of the legal cell at the Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha. We have with us also Gyansham Tiwari, who is the founder of PIindia.org and is the national spokesperson for the Samajwadi Party. So a hearty welcome to everyone who is here today, the panelists and the members of audience. In terms of how this topic is relevant, I think dissent is definitely an integral aspect of democracy. And debates of freedom of speech are something that have been carrying on for centuries as of yet, with people like Kant and John Stuart Mill. No conclusive end has ever been reached about where to draw the line with the freedom of speech. However, with the 21st century, we've had new stakeholders come into play with the proliferation of digital media. We have Twitter diplomacy that I think a lot of us here have engaged in. And we also at the same time have the proliferation of fake news that we must have come across while engaging in Twitter diplomacy. And overall, we have started noticing an erosion in the culture of tolerance in terms of listening to views that may not match our own. So the aim of this discussion today is to hear from different parties involved and perhaps contribute to increasing that culture of tolerance. So without any further ado, I would now request Dr. Amar Patnaik, Honorable Member of Parliament, to give a few words on this particular topic. Dr. Amar Patnaik, a brief introduction before I proceed, started off as an Indian Audit and Account Service officer and was the former Principal Accountant General of Sikkim, Odisha, West Bengal, and Kerala. Currently, he is a member of Parliament of India, representing Odisha in the Rajya Sabha, and is also the General Secretary of the Biju Janata Dal's Parliamentary Party Office. He also heads the IT wing and is a spokesperson of the BJD. So, sir, you now have the platform.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you, everybody, and thanks to the Red Alert guys, all the organizers for the invite. I made a little bit of preparation before joining into this webinar, and I thought I will start with Mahatma Gandhi, when he was charged with sedition. That's the flavor these days. So I start with that. Mahatma Gandhi, in response to charges of sedition against him, said, "Affection cannot be measured or regulated by law. If one has no affection for a person or system, one should be free to give the fullest expression to his disaffection, so long as he does not contemplate, promote, or incite violence." This was in response to the sedition law that was clamped on him of attempting to excite disaffection, given in section 124A of the sedition law that we have. He brought in the element that you can have disaffection. If you are charging me of disaffection, then I should have the full liberty to say whatever I have to say. So he played into the logic of the interpretation of the law to defend himself. I would not like to reiterate the fact that, which it requires no emphasis, that dissent is the pillar, is the backbone of the democracy that not only we but the world over has seen in any country, any part of the world. And the new forms that Arunima talked about of dissent, either through print media or through electronic media or in digital media, uh, they have brought in different kind of challenges to decide whether it's bordering on defamation or not. That's something which I will talk about later. I will make two important points that even currently, uh, with the law that we have of defamation, which is civil as well as criminal defamation under section 499 and 500 of IPC, the fact remains that the law on civil defamation is largely uncodified. Civil defamation is largely uncodified. There is a strong need for codification to ensure enforcement of safeguards such as requiring plaintiffs to demonstrate actual and serious harm. Currently, the law is such that you do not have to demonstrate harm to be, the law, the judiciary will only examine if there is an intent. But I think there is a need to bring the burden of proof, make it more more exacting, and to demonstrate actual and serious harm resulting from the publication or airing of defamatory content, then instituting sanctions for frivolous litigation. I think that has to be seriously taken, and the quantum of damages. The basic issue, as far as the jurisprudence in this is concerned, is relating to how much is reasonable, what kind of restrictions are reasonable, and what is proportionate, as we all know. And the courts have been interpreted right from Subramanian Swamy or Shreya Ghoshal. They have reiterated this fact that while the right to dissent and right to freedom of speech is guaranteed under the Constitution, so is the right to reputation, and therefore there is no obnoxious kind of interpretation if we have the law relating to criminal defamation. But it goes without saying that many countries in the world have, in fact, do not have a criminal angle to the defamation. They have restricted to a very narrow aspect of civil law as far as defamation is concerned. We also have the fact that in social media, I'll talk about it a little more because I am a member of the Joint Committee on Data Protection Law, talking about informational privacy. There we have had several discussions on social media intermediaries, how they play, and what is the kind of restriction that would be considered as reasonable and proportionate. So the Section 36 of that bill talks about various exceptions, and it has an exception towards journalistic freedom, provided it is guided under the either by a law or by self-regulation. Now, with the latest guidelines having come in, the basic quarrel with, while I agree that there has to be reasonable restrictions under 19.2, which all of us would agree, the onus of ensuring citizens' informational privacy or freedom of speech and expression cannot lie with the executive itself, which is generally accused of trampling on it. So it has to be with the judiciary, and all the grievance redressal mechanisms have to actually be headed by some such quasi-judicial or fully judicial, better, but quasi-judicial person. So this is the biggest quarrel that one is having in this entire debate, I thought, on dissent and defamation, because I thought nobody is having a case that there should be unbridled dissent to the extent of harming the reputation of a person, to the extent that he is harmed really in economic terms or physical terms. But the point is, it should be very narrow as possible. And who decides that limit? And that limit has to be decided by a process which is independent, which is very robust, and whose the members of that particular structure should be those whose core values in democratic dissent and freedom of speech should be very strong. And we have in our country for long believed that the judiciary could deliver that. Therefore, I think given the circumstances that we have and the institutions that we currently have, of course, there are debates relating to the kind of attacks on the institutional structures. But given what we have, the very best that we can do to preserve this basic cardinal principle of democracy, of freedom of speech and dissent, could be only by having an authority which is independent and which is robust. The last point that I would like to make is, in all this, however, the citizens have a big role to play. Every citizen and every organization, the structure, I'm not talking about institutional mechanism, I'm talking about organizations have a role to play. When organizations themselves or the individuals themselves forget the common good or the public good, I think it is always the executive which steps in to probably regulate. And that is where the problem starts. But if there is a strong community responsibility over the rights and responsibilities or duties towards democracy in the form of protecting dissent, at the same time the reputation of individuals and institutions, I think we would have created an ecosystem where the executive might find it difficult to trample on it, and the judicial processes would feel comfortable in delivering judgments that the community would that is good for the country or good for the democracy per se. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. You have definitely given us a lot to mull over, and I'm sure a lot of our audience also have questions, which we encourage you to drop in the chat box. We will be picking up quite a few of them and discussing and having a question answer session towards the end. But thank you, sir. Next up, we have Paranjay Guha Thakurta, who is an Indian journalist, writer, and documentary maker. He has been associated with big media houses like Business India, Business World, The Telegraph, India Today, and The Pioneer. He also hosted the chat show India Talks on CNBC India, which ran for 1,400 episodes. His main areas of interests are the working of the political economy and media in India and the world. And he has authored, co-authored, and directed and produced documentary films and books on the same topics. He is and has been a visiting faculty member at IIM Ahmedabad, Shillong, and Calcutta, along with the University of Delhi. So he was also a member of the Press Council of India. And we do encourage you to check out his books and his work. He is a prolific author and documentary maker. So, sir, we welcome you to the forum.
Thank you, Arunima. Thank you, Arunima. Thank you, Abhishek. I can see you've cut and pasted my CV from Wikipedia, because the first line you said, I'm an Indian journalist. Did you think I was from Japan? So in future, do a little bit of more homework and don't cut and paste blindly from Wikipedia. This is my humble request to you as a person old enough to be your father, Arunima. I was also pleasantly surprised by Dr. Amar Patnaik. As a good politician, he not only stuck to his time, he concluded before his time ended. It is a rare quality that we find in a political personality. So I want to give him compliments for having flagged. Sir, you were saying something which I couldn't hear you, sir.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. I said I'm learning to become a politician from a bureaucrat. So I think.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think what Dr. Patnaik has said is very, very important, and I'm going to touch on what he says, the points that he has raised. But before that, I'd like to separate the topic of our discussion into two clear parts. There's something called dissent and democracy, and there's defamation and democracy. So, by and large, what Dr. Patnaik said, he's focused on defamation. I would start by talking more about dissent. He is right. He is right. He has been rightly pointing out that if you call yourselves a democracy, that means you respect dissent. Because if you don't respect dissent, then you are not living in a democracy, you're living in an authoritarian state. So on that, I'm very clear. On that, as a person who I became a journalist because in the last 2 years of my education at the University of Delhi, at the Delhi School of Economics, was a period of the emergency. And that was the first time in the history of contemporary India when the political opponents to the ruling regime at that point of time, headed by Mrs. Indira Gandhi, had completely clamped down on all dissenting voices, whether they came from journalists, whether they came from politicians. Thankfully, the emergency lasted for 19 months effectively. At the end of the 21st month, in March 1977, it was lifted and you had elections and Indira Gandhi and her regime was defeated, electorally defeated. Today, we have a different kind of an emergency. Today, we have, as I would say, death by 1,000 cuts. Earlier, it was a jhatka. You cut the neck of the goat with one slice of the knife. Today, you have halal, you have a slow bleeding, and you see how, through various means, dissension has been completely suppressed. Now, you see, none of us like to be criticized, you know. From the time we are children, we are told you must listen to what your mother says. Somewhere along the line, as we, grow old, whether we like milk or Karela, we realize that our parents, even when they criticize us, they had our good in mind. The criticism was constructive, not destructive. The difference that we see today is earlier regimes were also not particularly tolerant of those who criticized them. But the difference is the present regime, which has been in power for now almost 7 years. I think not only are they intolerant of those who dissent, but they use the state, institutions of the state, to act in a vengeful manner. And that includes law enforcing agencies, that would include the CBI, the Income Tax Department, and so on and so forth. I could elaborate on this for a long time. But today we find, as a journalist with 43 years of work experience, I find that the space for dissenting voices has shrunk hugely. And attempts are being made to shrink it further. And the so-called mainstream media has become more subservient to those who are in positions of power and authority than ever before, certainly since the mid-70s when Mrs. Indira Gandhi imposed the emergency. I could hold forth on this for a long time, and Dr. Patnaik knows he's a member of the committee on this whole issue of privacy, but we also have the new IT rules that have come up, and I think every attempt is being made to stifle and suppress voices that are dissenting, that dissent against those who are in positions of power and authority. Now, in my opinion, the media is often described as the fourth estate. It is said it's supposed to hold truth to power. When the media or large sections of the media or the personnel in the media act as if they belong to advertising agencies or they act as if they are public relations officers, then you don't really have journalism, because it's a job of a journalist to ask questions. I dare say our Honorable Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, is the first Prime Minister of India who hasn't held an unscripted media conference during the last more than 6.5 years that he's been in power. All other prime ministers have held unscripted press conferences. Mr. Modi's interviews have been granted to particular individuals who've asked him questions. I would describe them as goody-goody questions. They haven't followed it up with cross questions. They haven't asked him questions that he would be perhaps reluctant to answer. So, in a sense, what we see is a one-way kind of communication that has happened. And this, to me, is something new and different that we've seen for the last 6.5 years and a little longer. And this is true for the media. And I do see attempt to make, have not just a Congress Mukt Bharat, but an opposition Mukt Bharat. Let me come straight to the point of defamation. I have a lot to say on the subject. And for your information, I am the co-author and publisher of a book called Sue the Messenger. It's written by Subir Ghosh, and I'm sorry I'm plugging my own work. And it's a book which was published in 2016 May, how legal harassment by corporates is shackling reportage and undermining democracy in India. If you want a signed copy, you can write to me and pay for it, of course. But that's besides the point. I'm using this forum to advertise my own work. But the basic problem I have is Article 19(1)(a) defines defamation. It defines the fundamental right to free expression. Journalists, authors, everybody derives their right to free expression. जो अभिव्यक्ति का स्वतंत्रता है, जो हर नागरिक का एक मौलिक अधिकार है, it is derived from Article 19(1)(a). The problem is more with Article 19(2). Who decides what is reasonable? Yuktigat pratibandhan. What is a reasonable restriction? That is where the problems arise. Is it your local station house officer, or is it the Inspector General of Police? Is it your magistrate in a lower court, or is it the Chief Justice of India? Is it the mob who disagrees with your political preferences, or is it your neighbor who believes because you disagree with him, you're an anti-national traitor? This is the problem. A law is often people take law into their own hands. And the recent amendments to the rules pertaining to information technology, in my opinion, give excessive powers to the executive, as has been pointed out by Dr. Patnaik. And in my opinion, that's not good for democracy. That's point number one. So when you look, I also want to say that India is one of the few countries in the world, one of the few, not the only one, but one of the few countries in the world where defamation remains a criminal offense. I am the proud recipient of legal notices from a dozen odd individuals, including lawyers representing some of the richest individuals in this country. At this particular point of time, I'm still fighting 3 defamation cases in different courts of law. I have personal experience, and if some of you are interested in knowing details, I'll be happy to oblige you. The problem is as simple. One is who decides what is a reasonable restriction on the right to free speech. The Supreme Court bench, headed by the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Mishra, who belongs to the same state as Dr. Amar Patnaik, his judgment, in my opinion, I disagree with it. The balance that he sought to draw between a person's reputation and the right to free expression, he's put it more or less on par. In my opinion, that's not correct. I think most countries of the world, including London, which used to be once known as the defamation capital of the world, has decriminalized defamation. I personally am of the view that defamation should be decriminalized. It could remain a civil offense and not a criminal offense. The next point is the whole issue of should truth be your... can you defend yourself by saying, I'm uttering the truth? Now, who decides what is the truth? Yes, it's a judiciary. But truth should be a defense, but it's not explicitly spelled out in many cases. And the last point is the whole issue of public interest. And we've seen that whole issue being taken up most recently in the case of MJ Akbar versus Priya Ramani. So we have to decide, we have to as a country decide that if we are proud of being a democracy, then we, just as every human being has the right to free expression, it's a fundamental right of every citizen, so too it's every citizen's right to sue. But we also need some checks and balances to ensure that these laws are not used, not only for frivolous litigation, but to harass. And essentially what has been described by lawyers as SLAPP, ASLAPPS, thappar. Ek thappar maro, slaps, strategic lawsuits against public participation. The whole idea is litigation is expensive, it's time consuming, and by in instituting such litigation, you send a chilling effect. It has a chilling effect on others, which seeks to stifle the right to free speech and the right to free expression. I stop here now because there's a lot more that can be said on each of the points I've made, but I hope, Ms. Arunima, I have stuck to my time limit. I think I'm following Dr. Amar Patnaik's example and finished a little ahead of schedule so we can have some more time for debate and discussion. Thank you very much once again, Abhishek Ranjan, Ms. Arunima, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this discussion. It's my honor and my privilege.
Thank you so much, sir. You have given us quite a lot to mull over, like Dr. Amar Patnaik had done. Some exquisite points that I would myself like to question towards the end. So I have marked it down, and I definitely have an important question regarding something that you have said. But thank you once again, sir. Up next, we have Charu Pragya, who is one of the most prominent young leaders of the Bharatiya Janata Party. She is the first female head of the legal cell of the youth wing of the BJP. She is a media panelist for the party and debates on national news channels, putting forward the party's point of view. She is an active advocate for female legal literacy and one of the only female panelists here. I think, thank you so much for giving us your time, ma'am. And you now have the floor.
Thank you, Arunima, and thank you, Abhishek, for having me with you today. And I'm happy, in fact, to be the only, not just the lady panelist, the only right-wing panelist today with you. And I have been listening to both my fellow panelists, and on many points, I would like to disagree with them, but I will leave that for another point, and I will just talk about what I wanted to mention right in the beginning. In politics, defamation is not taken as defamation. In fact, everybody will turn around and just say it's just politics, it's not personal, and defamation shouldn't be taken personally when you're a part of the political setup. And unfortunately, in democracy, there is a very fine line between free speech and slander, and that fine line is encroached more and more frequently. And that fine line actually is so fine that many a times even court cannot distinguish when slander becomes free speech or it's disguised as free speech. And the reasons for this are very many, because in a democracy, your core is your campaign speech, and it basically it's your campaign speech where slander starts. People disguise their defamation in many ways. It can be quoted as an opinion, not as a fact. So legally, no action can be taken against you. It can be substantially true. So when it is substantially true, again, legally, no action can be taken against you. And defamation and freedom of expression are basically two sides of the same coin, and it's very difficult to distinguish between the two. The panelist before me actually was talking about how defamation doesn't need to be criminal. I disagree with him very, very strongly, because when you read about defamation, and I'm a lawyer and I have been practicing law for 16 years now. So when you talk about defamation legally, especially in a country like India, I'm going to use one personal example. Today, if somebody raises a voice against me wrongly, if somebody tries to slander me, defame me, is it easy for me to go to civil court and say, my reputation is worth X amount of money, kindly make sure that money is paid to me, and that's where the case ends? Well, who's going to determine what is the worth of my reputation? Who's going to determine how much my good name is worth? Also, who's going to make sure that the person who is slandering me today has that kind of bank worth to pay me that kind of money? Many people, when fined even 20,000 rupees, will not be able to give those 20,000 rupees, but they will continue to slander you repeatedly. Most criminal offenses in India, the petty offenses, all the lawyers will agree with me, there are two parts to it. It's always a fine or a imprisonment of a certain amount of time. So that imprisonment term always exists only because not everybody can afford to pay the fine. We cannot put everybody in jail in putting them on the same plank, measuring them with the same ruler. It doesn't work like that. So actually having criminal defamation, especially in India, especially in a developing country, is extremely essential. And we have to understand that when we say it wasn't personal, it's just politics, it has to be taken in a more serious manner. Dissent is, of course, the very essence of democracy. Dissent is welcome. But when that dissent is just disguised defamation, there has to be a stop to it. I don't think that this regime has been authoritarian in any manner whatsoever. And if you want to remember authoritarian regimes, then it's not at the very recent past that we can look at Mrs. Gandhi's regime, where emergency was put in our country and nobody was allowed to raise their voices. That's not the truth today. We are actually having discussions. We're able to write on social media. We're able to print articles. We're able to put out books only because this dissent is allowed. I'm allowed to disagree with the popular opinion. And that's exactly why I say that our democracy is thriving. That's exactly why I say dissent is really, really visible in this particular democracy. See, another thing to note is that every way that we could measure dissent in the past is changing now. All the rules are changing because the scope of dissent is not just in the real world, it's moved into the virtual world. And in the virtual world, it can at times be even more dangerous than in the real world. I know for a fact, I know many people who are not going to go attend a rally, for example. They're not going to be active on ground, for example, but they are going to be extremely active with their smartphones in their hands. So how are you going to curtail that? And that's very difficult to regulate, because regulating it in totality is difficult, because the web is a dark place as well. Everything cannot be understood by people who don't understand the internet in depth. Our government doesn't understand it. Our authorities don't understand it. And tech giants have basically been playing God. Tech giants have basically been saying that you need us more than we need you. All the governments are on our platform, all the political leaders, all the journalists, all the celebrities are on our platforms, and you need our platform. So basically, we get to play God. We get to decide what is right. We get to decide what is wrong. And we are going to govern ourselves following our own rules, which are arbitrary. They list it down, but I frankly think they're arbitrary, because otherwise, how else is the Capitol Hill incident different from the incident that took place at Lal Killa in Delhi? Seen from a distance, seen from a neutral point of view, when you examine the pictures of both, don't they appear to be exactly photocopies of each other? But at the same time, tech giants have taken a different decision in both these cases. So today, it's important for our government, while it allows dissent, to also come with a way of making sure dissent is not a way to just hide another form of a movement which is way more sinister, of hiding something which is not actually dissent, which is something which is even worse than slander. So we have to rightly make two different verticals, but these verticals at the top somewhere blend, because dissent and defamation blend together. And especially at the time of elections, India is now India is actually practically always in election mode, but right now it is in very, very active election mode. And it's at this time that we see a lot of political speech, which can many a times be translated as defamation. So when we say that these are two independent verticals, dissent is actually not a part of defamation and we have to deal with them separately, I disagree, because when you talk about it in the context of democracy, when you talk about it in the context of government and politics, it actually blends together, and at the top, both of it becomes the same. And even the courts find it very, very difficult to separate the two, to distinguish between the two, and to figure out how much of it is comfortable and how much of it has to be stopped immediately. So, another thing about the current state of our democracy is that there's a lot of taking sides, and democracy is not always about taking sides. See, you cannot say that because I come from the right wing, I disagree with every single thing that the left wing says and does. That's not humanly possible. That's not even politically possible. So maybe I disagree with most of the things that they do and say. I am going to agree with the couple. That's just how dynamics politics work. Unfortunately, now dissent means that I have to disagree with everything on principle. So for people who do not support Prime Minister Modi, or for people who do not support the opposition leaders today, we cannot put a blanket of dissent and say, I agree with nothing that this man does. It's just not possible. So we have to take dissent in the right spirit of democracy. We have to also understand that we are allowed to disagree with each other, but there has to be an element of respect in it. We have to also understand that it's all right to come from a different political spectrum and to disagree with each other generally, but to agree on a point where you do collaborate. And every single thing cannot be something that the current government does wrong or the previous government had done wrong, and this is a fault of both the right and the left wings. I believe this firmly. If India has to become a better democracy, and that's the aim, right? We have to become better at what we do. Governance has to become better. The country has to become better. We have to progress. We have to remember that this dissent has to be done in such a way that is honest. Dissent is done on issues where you actually disagree. It cannot be a blanket dissent where you say, just because Prime Minister Modi supports this cause, I'm going to oppose it, because that's basically just how I'm supposed to behave. Thank you, Arunima.
Thank you, ma'am, for rebutting, for being one of the voices of rebuttal on this panel today. I think there are a lot of questions that have piled up, so we will be having, I think, a very intense question answer session after our final speaker. So we are now at our final speaker, Ghanshyam Tiwari. Sir, thank you so much for being here. Ghanshyam Tiwari is an Indian is a politician and candidate national spokesperson of the Samajwadi Party. He served as the advisor to the Janata Dal United Government in Bihar from 2010 to 2015. He was also the communication advisor to the Chief Minister and was the party spokesperson until 2016. So thank you so much, sir, for being here, and you now have the floor.
Thank you, Arunima, and thank you everyone who's been here in the audience. It is great to share a panel on this young platform with Shri Amar Patnaik ji, with Paranjay Das Thakurta sir, and with Charu. And it is great to learn about their point of views. I just wanted to start with something that I found as a quote of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And the quote says, I feel that the Constitution is workable, it is flexible, and it is strong enough to hold the country together, both in peacetime and in wartime. Indeed, if I may say so, if things go wrong under the new Constitution, the reason will not be that we had a bad Constitution. What we will have to say is that man was vile. What this quote speaks to me is that the most important thing, as we look at dissent, defamation, democracy, and the role of Constitution, the role of judiciary, the role of fair play in this entire exercise is the spirit of our democracy, the spirit of those who have power, who hold power, and question that is the man vile when we show them the mirror. I want to quote another article. This is from Scroll, February 2, 2021. 96% sedition cases filed against 405 people after BJP's 2014 victory. Shows new Article 14 database. The database shows that 149 people were accused of making critical or derogatory remarks against Prime Minister Narendra Modi. 144 against Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Adityanath, a man who rose to power not by doing charity, a man who rose to power by openly standing up for vile, bigoted, hated statement and hate men. So when such people rise to power, and we start talking about will they tolerate dissent? When mafia rise to power, will they tolerate dissent? You look at the state of parliament. We've had in the last 7 years more Sundays than the number of sittings in parliament. I go on television every day. You look at the state of media. People get up. Look at what happened. We were the only country which communalized the coronavirus. For nearly 3 months, Tablighi Jamaat episode played out. Did anyone here see anyone in the media apologize to the poor people who were victimized? And they were victimized when leaders like Adityanath, Chief Minister, apparently holding a constitutional position. Till date, they stand up and say that Tablighi Jamaat was the reason for why COVID spreading in India. So when you have leaders like this, who start, by the way, when the Prime Minister took oath, he said that our democracy would be incomplete without complete freedom of expression. When you have a tall leader who starts like that and sets out a government like this, and then we speak about defamation in the context of this kind of dissent, the kind of dissent where a Sudha Bharadwaj is in jail and Sadhvi Pragya is in the parliament. A setup where we speak about defamation, where cabinet ministers go to Bengal in the current election and say Begum Mamta Banerjee. Will Charu here tolerate if somebody says Begum Smriti Irani or Begum Nirmala Sitharaman? Why is this tolerated? How can the Prime Minister of India stand on a podium and say that Mamta Banerjee hates Jai Shri Ram? How? Is it not defamation? Does he have a special freedom of expression that we as citizens do not enjoy? Well, when we ask that, we must ask that who gave the Constitution? You look at the preamble of the Constitution. I want to quickly mention that. The preamble says that the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic and to secure to all its citizens justice, social, economic, and political. How will this justice be secured if there is no dissent? If people don't stand up when they are faced with this kind of brutal, intolerant regime? When the media is going to be one-sided, a media that plays out for 3 months, the WhatsApp chats of a poor girl who was demonized by the entire media. Where was the conscience of this whole idea of democracy, dissent, and defamation? I think when faced with Dr. Ambedkar's spirit that our democracy would belong to the spirited voice of democracy, who will put forward the ideas that democracy would give space to everyone who wants to question authority. Now that authority will be questioned if the government of the day is ready to accept dissent. If an 18-year-old girl is going to be put in jail, as happened in Bangalore, just because she shouted a slogan, a 21-year-old girl will be dragged from Bangalore in the name of a toolkit to Delhi and put in jail. It is clear that we have people who think that they are powerful leaders, but within them, they have very, very weak democratic principles. And when you have regimes that have very, very weak democratic principles, our democracy, the lifeline of our democracy is dissent. The one thing that makes me most powerfully positive about where India is headed is the idea that every year there will be more voices in Indian democracy who would present themselves. The number of girls and women who are participant in political process, the number of women who are in various legislators or at various important positions of our democracy is bound to expand. And they will expand not because somebody gives them space just like that, because they will dissent to status quo and they will stand up against status quo and demand their voice. And if there's a regime who will drag an 18-year-old into jail or a 21-year-old into Delhi or leak the WhatsApp chats of a young girl for political purpose, then that regime must be dissented against, no matter how powerful the Yogi Adityanath and Narendra Modi of this country are going to be. The other thing that gives me a sense of power for this country is that the Dalit voices, the marginalized voices, the fact that every voice that has not been there as part of statecraft in the last 2,000 years of our nation, 4,000 years of our nation is coming to the fore. They are participating in democracy not by accepting what is presented to them, by dissenting. So when you have states after states at one level bringing up ways by which they can curtail dissent, control social media, platforms like Op India becomes the torch bearers of this government, and then there are other platforms who are questioned. What happened in Hathras? The WhatsApp of a young journalist who covered the fact that the girl's body was burnt without the parents' consent and their presence. That was leaked. So when the state has the might is right principle, but the foundation of state is the Gandhian mantra that every one of us grew up reading, that when you decide, think about the weakest person you want to empower and make that the focal point of your decision. I think the weakest person in this country has to be empowered. The weakest person should be allowed to dissent, and the parliament, no matter which side, which party, right or left, center, any member of parliament in this country is. The one thing that is definitely the fundamental mission of every member of parliament is to tell the new generation your right to dissent is sacrosanct to our idea of building a new democracy. The JNUs of the world are important because they question the status quo. Those universities, those colleges where people pass the exams just as a passport to a flourishing career, they don't define our democracy. It is those institutions where people go with their idealism, use education to further the rights of those who have been marginalized, enable expressions who bring those who are not part of statecraft. It is those who dissent against the existing status quo. They are the ones, those institutions are the ones, those education institutions are the ones that must be celebrated. And they would not be celebrated if every dissent is turned into a threat or defamation or a CBI or an ED going to somebody's house or cabinet ministers. And it is not just that. I remember a class that I studied at Harvard, which is about how autocracies are sustained. One aspect of that class was that the supreme leader must talk directly to the masses and marginalize anyone in the middle. Who's in a democracy? Who is anyone in the middle? It is the institution. What happens when our media buckles down like this? What happens when we start questioning whether the judiciary is there to deliver justice or whether the judiciary is there to just play its symbolic role in the constitution? When those questions arise and the answers don't come and debates don't happen, the universities are shut. That is when it goes back to members of parliament in this country who are elected to tell the new generation that, look, your dissent, notwithstanding what the supreme leader is, what the falling institutions are, your dissent will power the new democracy. So with that, I think if we look at every instance that is playing out, you just ask one question. Is the powerful being celebrated by the institutions and the system, or is the weakest being secured by the institution and our democracy? Increasingly, unfortunately, it is the powerful that is getting celebrated every day by our institutions. And in the name of defamation, in the name of acting against dissent, in the name of saying who's national and anti-national, it is the platforms who celebrate the powerful who are shutting out the dissent and the only opportunity that the marginalized new voices in this country, who will actually be the future of democracy, will come forward. They are shutting out those avenues, and that is the responsibility every idealistic citizen has, every young citizen has, and everyone who believes that democracy is what makes India unique in this world. That is the responsibility that every one of us has. So with that, I will pause. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Tiwari sir, for adding a lot of nuance to the debates that we've had so far. And with that, we have concluded the initial comment section of this panel discussion. We will now be moving on to the question and answer session, and we've got quite a few of them piling up. So I'll begin with one that I personally have that I would really appreciate if any panel member can answer. I think a lot of the comments here so far have relied or tried to provide a solution by depending on inculcating tolerance organically amidst society in response to whatever is happening in status quo. However, how is this organic development of tolerance going to happen? Because that intrinsically means that we are depending on outrage to happen when we hear about excesses being committed by the state, but that outrage is not something that is happening in a number that is large enough for it to have meaning. Every day we come across certain instances, and towards the end, I think at least large section of the youth has gotten desensitized to it towards the end. So in such a context, how do you think we can go ahead and create this tolerance that a lot of you have been suggesting?
Okay. So I think there are three things that I want to say very quickly. One is this whole idea of tolerance, right? Tolerance against what? Tolerance against ideas of our fellow countrymen, right? The reason this idea takes central stage is because a lot of nationalism is being preached through televisions and is being consumed in drawing rooms, just sitting in the drawing room. My father served Air Force. I grew up traveling across the country. And one thing that I learned is that you cannot be nationalistic sitting in a drawing room. Go and see every corner of this country that you can see And when you go and visit that corner, you will realize that people are as patriotic as you are. The idea of nationalism has never been about what you can test in the other person, other fellow citizen. It is about what you as a citizen bring to the table for the country, right? So when we talk about tolerance, it is those people who want to shrink the definition of nationalism, and then in a majoritarian way say what can be tolerated. It's nobody's business what can be tolerated. We have a constitution. The constitution says that these are our fundamental rights, and people have to, the state, the role of the state has to continuously build exposure of one aspect of diversity of India to another aspect of diversity of India. I think the debate today is unnecessarily pushed into a narrow range. If we want to organically build tolerance in our country, still staying true to your question, then we must encourage every community to have an opportunity to interact with every other community. And when they do that, the organic tolerance will be visible. And at the same time, I think like every organization must have its own immunity system. The fact that not enough protests are happening, well, that is a sad state of affairs, and it is true. But I think there's a very natural immune system India has, where the young people grow up as idealists. They believe that they should see each other as individuals, irrespective of their religions, and they should stand up for the right of each other. So I think CAA and RC protests also showed that how students from various colleges came forward and took up the baton in front of this government.
May I add to what Ghansham has said, what Ghansham Tiwari has said?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Arunima, when you talk about outrage and when you talk about tolerance, this whole issue is who is Sahanshilta kya hai? And the issue is not just of tolerance. The point is you show intolerance through various means. It gets reflected when individuals are targeted. The Income Tax Department acts in a selective manner. The Enforcement Directorate acts in a selective manner. Now, I can give you dozens of examples of individuals, whether they be media organizations, who have been targeted and others who have not. So when the law enforcing agencies, when the institutions responsible for strengthening democracy act in a partisan manner, act in an intolerant manner, it's not just intolerance, it becomes vengeful. That's point number one. I completely agree with what Ghansham said about we want to shrink our definition of nationalism. I can agree to disagree with Ms. Charu Pragya about whether we need criminal defamation or not, but I can equally strongly argue that we certainly don't need one law which was enacted during the colonial era, and that is a law on sedition, Deshadroha. Because it comes to who is a patriot, who is a traitor. Either you're with me or you're not with me. This kind of binary in public discussion is highly undesirable. You see, if we have to argue as to what is your notion of tolerance, I want to take the discussion forward. Is the will of the majority always going to prevail? Is democracy the will of the majority, or is it also respect for the wishes of the minority? Let's take an example. You say 80% or 81% of Indians are Hindus, and you say, okay, 14% of Indians are Muslim. What is your notion of democracy? Is that if all Hindus believe in a particular way, that means they can override everybody else because they are in a majority? Or is your notion of democracy the right to does it include respecting the wishes and what minorities? When you talk about communalism, we have to argue what is more dangerous: minority communalism, majority communalism. Ghansham Tiwari talked about Shaheen Bagh, talked about the protesters against the CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, and the NRC, the National Register of Citizens, which in the capital was led by Muslim women in Shaheen Bagh in the Jamia area. But look how certain sections have tried to treat or paint the farmers who are protesting against the laws. Now, you can have a different view. You can say these laws are good for farmers. Somebody will say, no, it's not good for farmers. But why do you question their patriotism? Why do you call them Khalistanis and Pakistanis? just because you disagree with their interpretation of how the law has been enacted through ordinances, what was the need for it, whether we need it or not. So I believe that, at the end of the day, many of our laws are completely outdated. But what is even more important is the way these laws are interpreted. And here, let me very politely disagree with Ms. Charu Pragya. No, I don't think you can treat Capitol Hill, the incident of Capitol Hill, with what happened at Lal Killa. I'm sorry, I do not see them as photocopies. They are as very, very different. They are as different. I mean, I can hold forth on this in greater detail, but I want to just make 2 points. When first information reports are misused, when laws of sedition are used to target people, as Ghanshyam Tiwari pointed out, the study by Article 14, which has been quoted in the Wire, you see suddenly the spike in the use of these sedition laws, which are British era laws. Why? Why now? Why again so many journalists? Is there a pattern in all this? So, I mean, I can go on and argue about whether we need criminal, where defamation should be criminal or just a civil case, just as you can argue what should be the quantum of damages in a civil defamation case. I can also argue equally that if you make it if you make defamation a criminal offense, we can argue what should be the quantum of the punishment, how many days in jail, 1 day in jail, or 10 years in jail. We can argue. A person is convicted for allegedly Prashant Bhushan is convicted for defaming the Chief Justice of India. Now, what is the punishment? The punishment is 1 rupee. What message does it send out? I'm raising questions because I think these are important questions that need to be answered. And, when we talk, I regret to say, unlike Ms. Charu Pragya, she is a very fine lawyer, I'm sure. I do not think one should conflate dissent with defamation. Libel, slander, all these have certain meaning. There is something called a reputation. There is something called willfully saying something to hurt the reputation of another person. So if I say that Ghanshyam Tiwari is wearing a black coat, I'm stating a fact. But if I say I don't like his black coat, I'm passing an opinion. So the question is, will Mr. Tiwari sue me for defamation for publicly saying I don't like his coat? Now, I'm not trivializing this issue, but I think these are issues that we need to discuss in greater detail, and we mustn't conflate, in my opinion, dissent with defamation. And the use of this word, anti-national. Who is anti-national? Whose definition of nationalism are you going to? I'm a proud Indian. I believe I'm patriotic as any Indian. What am I proud of? I'm proud that we have the most diverse country. We are the most diverse country in the world. We are the only country in the world with 17 languages on our currency note, 21 languages in the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India, excluding English. Many people, young people, don't know. They think Hindi is the national language. Hindi is one among 21 national languages. It might be the Raj Bhasha, it's not the Rashtra Bhasha. So I have a problem when our religious, cultural, geographical, historical diversity is being sought to be made monolithic, because it adheres to somebody's notion of what should be and what not should be. And if I don't agree, then I'm an urban Naxal. I'm a part of the Tukre gang. I'm part of the Khan Market gang. So I don't like this kind of demonization that goes on in the name of dissent. The demonization of the dissenters. Okay, I stop here. I can talk on. I can go on and on. But I'm sure the others would like to add to the discussion.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Charu, would you like to respond? Because I think a lot of questions have been positive.
Yeah, I would like to, and my co-panelist has been definitely is not defamation, but if you say the black coat was stolen, that is defamation. How do you determine whether the coat he's wearing was stolen or purchased or borrowed? So these are the gray lines that I'm talking about. But I can be very respectful because, like I said, dissent has to be encouraged in a democracy, and dissent does not mean stepping over each other's toes. And sedition is an entirely different topic. I can go on and on discussing sedition because there are many things which I think, when you live in a privileged society, when you live in a comfortable world, and when your home is secure, when your family members are secure, and basic things in your everyday life are not being challenged, it's very easy to say sedition can be scrapped away and we don't need it. But when you come from a family of armed officers, when you come from a family of uniformed men, you have to take it in the correct spirit. You have to also understand that sedition is very much required in a country where there are border conflicts. Sedition is very much required in a country where these conflicts could also be stemming from people who are working and living internally. So these are very, very vast topics, and I know Arunima would not want to get into these discussions right now. But Arunima, if there is a specific question from the chat box that you want me to take, I'll be happy to do that.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. We have I think we need to digress for a bit because a lot of the questions have been about the new regulation on media and OTT platforms, which I think definitely you can answer. So largely the questions have been revolving. But before we proceed, Dr. Amar, sir, would you like to add anything to this particular line of this particular topic? Because I think we'll be digressing.
Yeah, no, I just, yeah, thank you, Arunima. Made this point that dissent is very much a part of democracy all over the world and a part of Indian democracy. It's ingrained in it. So I think to question whether dissent is there and all, whether we should have dissent or not, is, I think, meaningless. Even in the Supreme Court, when a judgment is written by a 3-judge bench, a particular judge can give a note of dissent. So dissent is ingrained in our system. And even in our parliament, you have a system of the ruling party and the opposition where there is a debate and discussions do take place with opposing points of view. So dissent, and this is allowing dissent, whether dissent should be allowed or not, has been ingrained in our constitutional scheme of things, is also evident from the fact that judgments after judgments of the Supreme Court have upheld that. And that is why we also having how many days of the farmers' protest now. Irrespective of all the insinuations that are made, the very fact that the protest is being held and has been held, and the courts have held it that it can be held, is a testament to the fact that in our country, dissent is there. Now, the question is, what is the limit when it borders or transcends into something called as defamation? Now, that's where the problem is, and that has been left to the courts. It is not for the first time here now that we are discussing this kind of a question. This was there even before. I would not, in the history of the 42nd and the 40th amendments and all the things came at the time, emergency, these issues were there. These issues have already been there in many states separately. Many states now may not be at the national level where people felt that the slapping of the sedition law or the defamation law has been particularly severe. It was only merely a question of expressing dissent. But then we have to ultimately go by the Constitution. This is what we and the people of the country have given us, the Constitution. So the constitutional scheme of things have to be respected, and ultimately the final interpretation of the Constitution is remaining with the judiciary. Therefore, in my concluding part during the first few comments that I made, I did say that we have to develop the ecosystem, and as you said, Arunima, that developing the culture of tolerance, it is very much ingrained in Indian blood, actually. I mean, I would not like to sound a typical or somebody accusing me of being a right-wing Hindu, but Vivekananda's speech in the even the Parliament of Religions did speak that Hindu religion is very, very tolerant, and I do believe in that. I strongly believe in that. It is unfortunate that when this particular ecosystem is kind of desecrated because of institutional failures. It could be the media, it could be the executive, it could be the legislature, it could be the judiciary itself. And that is what we have to protect. Not one of us can actually do it. And every institution has to play its part if we really have to celebrate this democracy with the dissent and a limit on the freedom of speech, limited only to the part of, let's say, public order or disaffection against the country. The interpretation should be as narrow as possible. Let's be reasonable and not get into rhetorics. I thought a lot of it, the political orientation that is brought into this debate is fine for, fine for political field. But I would probably think that the most apt thing would be to make the definition of defamation as narrow as possible, make the definition of sedition as narrow as possible. The dissent, the culture of dissent and the expression of dissent could be and should be as broad as possible. All of us should work towards that. And the interpretation of what is right and what is wrong should be left to an institution which is very independent. And so far, we have, the Constitution has assigned that particular responsibility to the judiciary. We might question the wisdom of judges, but judiciary as a system, the citizen of India still have confidence of. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think now we can move on to another important theme that has been repeating quite a lot in the chat box here, which is essentially regarding the new regulation on media and OTT platforms as well as online news outlets. A lot of people are concerned whether the consequences of this particular new regulation would result in a lot of these media houses as well as content generators to now self-censor. And if that is a concern that, I mean, how do you exactly, isn't that like a violation of freedom of expression? And, but at the same time, arguments have been placed that there has been an excess of fake news also circulating with this regulation could kind of curtail or prevent. So how is it that this regulation is to go ahead and maintain a balance, and were alternatives that had been provided by the media outlets themselves not sufficient enough that the government had to go ahead and come up with this regulation, government and the Supreme Court actually? So, yeah.
These regulations are actually an improvement over the regulations which are already there. And there is also the IT Act. What it does is that it makes it more specific, and the social media intermediary is more accountable. Now, does any one of us approve of a content relating to child pornography in the deep web? Somebody has to monitor it. Somebody has to control it. And therefore, what the regulation does, it provides a timeline for dealing with the content has to be brought down, a grievance redressal mechanism. And sometimes you do not have people, during our deliberations we have seen in the that companies do not have any responsible person in the country to even talk to even get an affidavit from. And that's what the regulations have done. What I dispute, however, which I have a quarrel with, is that the final arbiter in the content cannot be the executive itself or cannot be the government itself. It has to be a judicial or a quasi-judicial authority. The oversight role cannot be only assigned to the government, because if you look at the fundamental right violation, Article 32 to 26 cases in the High Court or the Supreme Court, the maximum number of fundamental right violation cases are against the state. And therefore, it is the state also which has to, if it is the state which the citizen has to go against, how can the state itself be the arbiter in this? Therefore, in the interest of having a very sound system which will protect the citizens against fake news, harmful news, or harm their children or harm the society, there should be regulations. Whether if people do not self-regulate, then there has to be regulation brought in by the Parliament by the Parliament. But then the point is, who will be the ultimate arbiter as to what is right and what is wrong? Should be somebody who is not an executive or not from the Parliament, but should be somebody who is, or a committee or a body which has people who are from the judiciary or quasi-judicial people of you see, this is something also which is highly technology intensive. So there have to be people who have the knowledge of what is happening in the tech space. And unless we have such people, you may have decisions on content which would actually be either killing freedom of expression or giving too much leeway to freedom of expression.
Thank you, sir. Would anybody else like to comment?
Okay. First, let me agree with some of the points that have been made by Dr. Amar Patnaik, that we need to make the definition of defamation as narrow as possible. The problem arises in the judiciary itself and the way the Contempt of Court Act has actually been implemented and the way it has been used, and I dare say on occasions misused by particular judges. As I pointed out earlier, Article 19.2 doesn't define what is in the public interest. It doesn't talk about truth being a defense. These are issues which remain unresolved. To add to what he said, nobody in his right mind can ever support the dissemination of child pornography on the social media. I think the problem is not that. The problem with the new IT rules is the same problem which happened when in the Shreya Singhal case, the Supreme Court actually quashed the attempt that was made to change the IT Act and the intermediary rules. Second point is, contrary to what the government has claimed, what Mr. Prakash Javadekar and Mr. Ravi Shankar Prasad has said, the IT rules represent a classic case of trying to swat a fly with a giant sledgehammer. You are trying to, as in the case of the farm laws, you didn't have any pre-legislative consultation. You just rammed it down. You only spoke to those who you wanted to speak to, and you know who would agree with you. You did not bring in the dissenting voices before you brought in these rules. Secondly, the whole issue is, and here I agree with Ms. Charu Pragya, you are today having giant digital monopolies who control what you watch and what you hear and what you see. The Googles and the Facebooks of the world. At a time when the economy of India was in deep recession, when because of the COVID situation, the economies had crashed, huge amounts of money were being invested by these giant digital monopolies in Reliance Jio, which is headed by India's richest man, Mr. Mukesh Ambani. Be that as it may, the point I'm trying to make is that there are attempts in different parts of the world, in Australia, in the United States of America, in other parts of the world. Remember, Twitter blocked the tweets of Mr. Donald Trump while he was still the president. In Germany, in France, in Canada, there have been a lot of discussion and there's been legislation on how you can actually curb the digital monopolies' power to abuse, their monopoly positions. So I think the whole issue is that when you look at the new digital laws, you are only claiming it is light touch regulation with a soft hand. No, it's heavy-handed regulation. I agree completely with what Mr. Dr. Patnaik has said. The whole grievance redressal mechanism is highly flawed. You're giving a lot of powers to executives. The whole grievance redressal mechanism is inadequate. And most importantly, you're not recognizing the problem. You're trying to club everything from over-the-top platforms, Amazon Prime and Netflix, showing films which you think should be censored, to aggregators who are aggregating information. And we have enough information to say that the so-called traditional media, the so-called legacy media, has been lobbying very hard to have these rules to protect their own turf. And last but not, you're trying to conflate into all these regulations digital news. These are three separate categories. You're drawing up new categories. You're doing all kinds of things without even consulting the people who are going to be affected, without having widespread discussions which the Supreme Court itself had said you should have pre-legislative consultations, which has not happened. So I don't know how the courts will decide on the legality or otherwise of these new rules which have been put together, but I dare say that they're very deceptive. I mean, on the surface, it appears you're doing something which is desirable and very good, but it also gives undue powers to the ruling dispensation and the bureaucracy, which often acts in a manner which is slavish to the ruling dispensation and their political masters to stifle freedom of expression and dissension in the media. That is my fear. And as a member of the Digital Publishers Association, we've sought to articulate our views to the government, but we are yet to hear from them.
Great. So, Ghanshyam sir, would you like to voice in on this particular conversation before we go on to our last question?
Well, I'll just briefly say that there's just too much abrupt intervention by the government from the point where the government said that privacy should not be given to everyone in the court, and the Supreme Court stood against the government natural locus standi, and then politically the government said no, we want privacy for all. From that point to all the delay that has happened with respect to data privacy, right, to the point where at one end the government would want to promote, several ministers have said, platforms like Op India, and on the other end you have cases that are regularly filed against journalists. In this backdrop, if the government suddenly brings a new regulation without due consultations, I am suspicious. I think India is fairly strong professionally. We have deep professional capability to be able to fully debate what is the right model for this regulation, and I don't think that capability has been tapped yet.
Thank you, sir. We will now be moving on to our final question, where a lot of people appear to have queries about whether the criminalization of defamation in and of itself is something that is fruitful as an exercise, because the process itself can become a punishment due to judicial backlogs and delayed judgments. So, in such a case scenario, how can the rights of citizens to dissent and practice of free speech necessarily be safeguarded?
So I will just make a small comment and then
Yes, sir, absolutely.
I think that when the state is deciding, I go back to the fact that you have enough data that is emerging, and you can see that whose dissent has been challenged and by the state, or has been thwarted by the state or punished by the state, and who is facing the brunt of this the defamation. In the MJ Akbar case, the judge, just before when the arguments concluded, I think the judge was changed. So you look at how defamation is playing out. I believe that yes, it is great to have Dr. Amar Patnaik's framework of a balance of minimum defamation and proper room for dissent. I don't think democracies work on that balance if the spirit is missing. And I think from that perspective, if I have to err, I would rather err on the side of dissent than on the side of defamation. I think criminalization of defamation, it becomes a very easy tool for those who are powerful, whether monetarily or by the state's power, to act against those whose dissent will further the democracy.
Thank you, sir. Would anybody else like to voice in?
I agree with you, Arunima, that the process is the punishment. There's so much that's been talked about this. The long arm of the law can be very, very long. The wheels of justice that grind slowly can grind in excruciatingly slowly. So, one is the legal system, how it works and how it does not, how it favors the powerful, how it favors the rich. These are very, very important issues. And then I think equally important is when you look at the institutions of the state, which are meant to uphold and protect democracy, when there are concerted attempts made to reduce their independence, when pliant individuals are made are put in these positions, when they become effectively political appointees, and I can name you a dozen such institutions, from the controller and auditor general of India to the Election Commission of India, to the Central Vigilance Commission, to the Central Bureau of Investigation, and so on and so forth. When all these institutions, they lose their autonomy and their independence and become pliant and servile to those who are in positions of power and authority, you are undermining democracy. You are killing democracy by 1,000 cuts. And one of the ways you're doing it is also by stifling the right to defend, the right to dissent, and the right, and by misusing the laws of defamation. These would be, in my opinion, my concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Amar Patnaik, sir, would you like to gain?
I would, yeah, just a few words. I think very fruitful discussion that we've had, but this is the kind of discussion that we have been having. And that's the beauty of our democracy, that we still are able to have these discussions. The point is, the criminality, defamation, our discussion has been largely centered around the citizen against the state. But my point is, we have several cases of citizen against citizen too. Your right ends when my nose starts bleeding. So the point is, that also has to be factored in. And if that has to be done, then the common law has to be there. But the entire atmosphere of dissent, freedom of speech and expression is a part of our constitution. Now, if it is a part of the constitution, it is, again, I will come back to what Paranjoy ji spoke, and I have been repeatedly saying, is that our institutions, how strong and robust are institutions. It is true that sometimes it is the people who make the institutions or break the institutions, but we also have to have such institutions which are not dependent on one single individual. Therefore, we have multi-member commissions, and we have, we have provisions that they cannot take up any assignment after they have finished that particular assignment. Several such safeguards are there. We can have a debate as to whether these safeguards are sufficient or not, whether the laws need to be changed or not, whether there are amendments brought in or not. Those are evolving process, and therefore, I think these kind of debates will only evolve the law relating to defamation. I'm very clear about the thing that discussion and dissent is not really required because it's ingrained in our constitution, in our democracy, and democracy is all over. Democracy is not possible without dissent. But defamation is something which can be misused, abused, and therefore has to be brought under a narrow confine. But at the same time, we also have to be concerned about a citizen's own right to privacy, right to human rights, right to reputation. It is very important. How far he will go in protecting it through a civil process or through a criminal process is something that will evolve over a period of time. As Ghanshyam ji spoke about, this is the same Supreme Court of India. If you look at the judgments relating to privacy, some 30 years ago, it held that no, individual privacy is not a fundamental right, and it ends by Puttaswamy judgment to say that it is a fundamental right. So law is always an evolving process, and we can always say that it should evolve. I will end with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much to everyone who has been on this panel. It has been fantastic hearing all of you and being able to hear such a diverse set of opinions. Charu ma'am had to leave early because she had another debate. But as a political science student, if I may, I feel like so far it's become quite evident that we are operating, or the current government has been operating within a framework which is very much legal in the way that law has always been open to interpretation. And I guess the issue then becomes that how much and who gets to decide what interpretation suffices. And I think that is a point that was covered very nicely throughout the debate here today, which then leads on to bigger questions as to the entire polarization of opinions, and then whose truth is the one that becomes the ultimate truth, and what to do when the ultimate truth is something that is not very that does not coalesce very nicely with what the founding fathers of India had in mind. But needless to say, today has been an excellent conversation, and I'm sure that the audience here, given the questions that have come in, the feedback that we've gotten, has had a good time as well. So we now have Simran Sachdeva to give a vote of thanks.
Good evening, everybody, all the panelists and participants who have played an integral role in this discussion. So carrying on to what Arunima said, these conversations are important and have been hard in the recent times as well, to have it on this platform in a civilized manner, to ensure that everybody is able to keep their point of view, even when it's not aligned, with when everybody's not aligned on the same ideology, or just to have dissenting or different opinions hasn't been very easy. So it has been a wonderful evening, and I would like to extend a word of thanks to all our invited panelists for taking out, this precious time of yours to actually educate us young people and bring in their experiences and opinions, which actually help us to think more critically and frame our own views, and also to question certain things which we might not have considered earlier. It was personally a very insightful discussion for me, and I'm sure for all participants. So special thanks to Dr. Amar Patnaik, Rajya Sabha MP, and Mr. Paranjay Guha, Mr. Ghanshyam Tiwari, and Ms. Charu Pragya, who isn't here, and to the whole team, because this planning of the event started days ago, and they ensured that they were able to coordinate this event smoothly, ensure that every single participant gets a good experience. And a very special thanks to Arunima for flawlessly moderating this discussion, because I'm pretty sure it wasn't easy when she imagined actually handling how different questions come in and giving everybody a chance to ensure that everybody gets a fair chance to put their opinion on table. So, and definitely to Abhishek sir for being the constant guidance and just ensuring we make it successful. Thank you everybody for coming
Thank
as
you so
well.
much. Namaskar.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Fazia,
Thank
sir.
you.